On our live stream back there, the video is always like 4 minutes late. Like it's a loop that it goes through. So I'm watching myself back there give announcements, holding a cup of coffee, looking like this. I'm like, I'm such a dad. It's just, Josh is like, it looks like you're about to like yell at a kid like on first base coaching. I'm like, it totally does. I got nothing, guys. I'm just a dad in this world. I'm wearing golf shirts. You know, thank you all for being gracious to me. It's real. A conversation I've been thinking about a lot as we've been in the Gospel of Mark is this deeper idea of reintroducing us to Jesus. That I think so many of us grew up in a world where the version of Jesus that we were given probably was twofold. There's probably a part of you that feels intimate and connected and beautiful, and there's something there that's beyond. It's not, the words aren't all there for you, but you can feel it. And then there's another part, a story that somebody gave you that you were bad and there was something wrong with you and things that needed to be fixed in the world, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't add up. There was exclusion there. It doesn't all make sense. And what I love about this place is that when we look at Christianity, when we look at our faith, it's so much bigger and more robust than many of us were given, maybe in the American evangelical or conservative version of faith that we were given. It's not all bad, but I think it just wasn't fully robust. Then when we look at the history of Christianity, there's just a bigger Jesus that's out there. And there's plenty of things that we can let go of. The angry God, the God that's playing games with you, the rapture God, the God that is somehow oriented in fear and hell. And we can move towards a Jesus that's interesting, that reorients us into reality, that is curious about our lives getting better. A Jesus who always leaves us better than he finds us. A Jesus who brings us to God and to life and to fullness. A Jesus who the standard is equality and that every human being is made in the image of God. A Jesus that actually wants ethics from us and a robust way of living that works. That kind of Jesus. We can have that, and we can also say no to some of the other things that just aren't helpful and weren't helpful in our lives. Where we're at now in the Gospel of Mark, because we've been started in the Gospel of Mark, I have no idea when we're going to finish. We're in chapter 2, that the first chapter of Mark is all about the introduction of Jesus, and you're seeing that everywhere that Jesus goes, Jesus is healing people. There's a credibility that Jesus is building with the world for trust. Because there's not a single human being out there who says, I want less healing. I want less wholeness. I want less health. I want less integration. We all want more of that. And Jesus is offering that. That is what Jesus is bringing into the world. Jesus is establishing his credibility and says wherever Jesus went, he preached this radical good news about the love of God, about the goodness of humanity. And Jesus preached this radical good news and healed people. Jesus healed everybody. It says the crowds would come to him and he just would heal and heal and heal and heal. And now we get to chapter 2 and we're going to see these 4 stories in a row where Jesus is going to be challenged. And that's just true of life, by the way. Side note, not what the sermon is about. But if you ever put yourself in a position of leadership or you put yourself out there, you're just giving people the luxury of having an opinion about you. So congrats. And Jesus puts himself out there in a way that he's healing everybody, and there's a luxury of opinion about him, and they begin to challenge him in the ministry and the work that he's doing in the world. And this common thing that we'll see along with Jesus healing is that Jesus will also begin to call people. Calling sometimes is overly spiritualized in the world that we grow up in, but today we're going to talk about calling in a way that Jesus is not calling us to a vocation or just a purpose, although I believe in those things. The calling that we're going to talk about today is that Jesus is calling us to wholeness. Jesus is calling us to health, and Jesus is calling us to integration. That is a calling that Jesus has for every human being, and not everybody's going to take up that calling. Not everybody's going to choose to participate in following Jesus that way. And what we'll see is Jesus doesn't shame you for that, condemn you to hell for that. Jesus just continues to heal the crowds. But he does say, but if you want to follow me, if you want to know more about this life of wholeness, if you want to know more about this life of healing, if you want to know more about this life of integration, come and follow me and let me show you my way of doing things. Let me show you what it looks like to do humanity through my perspective. Let me show you what it looks like to see God in these ways. So to talk about calling today, we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about reintroducing Jesus, and if we can do that, then we're going to talk about how we're going to wake up and then moving all the way to show up. And if we can do that, then we're going to talk about who's calling and who is this Jesus. If we can do that, then we need to talk about some tools. Do we want to be creative or reactive in our lives? And then a Tommy Boy quote, who's your favorite little rascal? And if we can talk about who's your favorite little rascal, we can talk about everyone and always. Then we can come back to show up. And if we can do that, we can talk about the difference between training and trying. Follow along with me in Mark chapter 2. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake, and a large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. Again, large crowds keep coming to Jesus because Jesus keeps showing up and healing them. Jesus is establishing credibility for who he is. Large crowds don't follow you if you're not doing the right things. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." This idea of calling starts with this framework, which comes from integral psychology or spiral dynamics. If you've never read spiral dynamics, talk about a good time and nerding out on the internet later. You can certainly Google it. Integral psychology is this idea and this framework that first we need to wake up, that we all have an awakening somewhere, and that awakening generally happens because of great suffering or great love. Your awakening generally happens because you hit rock bottom. We use that language. It was too much and life was not working out for you, and you could no longer do it that way anymore. Or the beautiful one, sometimes this doesn't happen as much as I would like, but you just experience great love. The love was so overwhelming. It was so healthy and whole that it also changed you and gave you an awakening for who you are and what it means to be human. So when we think about calling, that Jesus is calling us to integration, Jesus is calling us to healing, Jesus is calling us to wholeness, that we start with waking up. But where we want to end and where we'll finish today is eventually we'll want to show up. After we go through this journey of waking up, this journey of following Jesus, this journey of becoming healthier human beings, then over here when we show up, now we have light to offer other people. That light is already in you, by the way. That's such an important message. You're not playing a game with God where you need to go find that light somewhere else. That light is already in every single human being. The message of Jesus is that you can see that goodness that's already in you. The early church participated in this process called theosis. We talked about this in here a lot. Theosis simply meant this: you are already made in the image of God. That is just the drumbeat of the first stories of the Bible. You are good, you are good, you are good, you are good. How do you know you are good? Because God is good, God is good, God is good, and you are made in the image of that Creator. If you are told stories, you are bad, you are bad, you are bad, you are bad, feel free to tell those people that they are not following the Bible. The Bible starts with you are good, and that is the story that you need to hold on to. Jesus comes to remind you of your goodness, not talk to you about your badness. When you can see the goodness within you, when you can see holy and healthily and healing, when you've gone through transformation, and that light that is already within you, which is unique to you, by the way. There's 8 billion human beings on planet Earth, and we all show a different facet of God's love and God's light in the world. What a gift. What a gift that we have the ability to do that for one another. And when we find wholeness, we get to shine that unique light in a different way, and we can now show up for others. It is a hefty journey between waking up and showing up. Jesus is always honest about that, by the way. Again, we talked this about here a lot of times. When you hear things like, right, the path is narrow that leads to life, and the gate is wide that leads to destruction, that is not a commentary on hell. I'm so sorry. That's not what it's about. It's a story that wholeness and health and integration is hard work. How do you know that? Because you signed up to have a gym membership before. And you can think about your gym membership all you want, or you can be like Jeff and look good today. It's your choice. But you didn't stare at your gym membership. You went to the gym. So that's all that Jesus is inviting you into, a process of practice to do that work, and you're doing it because you know that you're whole. You're not doing it out of shame. You're not doing it out of should-haves. You're not doing it out of guilt. You're doing it because you know that you're already good and that the love of God has light that can shine out of you, and you just want to clean the mirror a little bit more to reflect that goodness in the world. What a different energy to take into it. And so Jesus is calling that out of us into integration, into health, and into wholeness, to wake up in different ways. One of the things that Jesus calls us into is he calls us into this health because Jesus models health for us. When we think about health and we think about Jesus, I always say this about Jesus. Jesus shows us the best of who God is and the best of who we are. It's something I use with my children, by the way. It's so simple. I grew up in a world where I memorized all these Bible verses. I was terrified that I was going to hell at 5 years old. I was for sure certain that I was going to miss the rapture because I thought about boobs and then I said shit, right? And of course I did. I was a teenager. That's what I was thinking about. But I'm not even trying to be facetious. I was at war with myself for no reason that didn't need to be there. And it's not Jesus who's doing that. By the way, when we go through the Gospel of Mark over the next 7 years or however long it takes us to get through here, you're going to notice that Jesus never says things like, I have come because Adam and Eve messed some stuff up for you. Isn't that weird that Jesus never mentions that in the Gospels? Only person that will ever mention that later is Paul, by the way, and Jesus will talk about Adam and Eve. Paul will talk about that later just because he's trying to convince a bunch of Jews to see that Jesus was the Messiah. But the rest of the time, the Bible's not interested in that because that's not the story. Someone gave us a bad story that's not helpful for what Jesus is trying to do in the world, right? All that Jesus talks about is this kingdom of God. Maybe in better language today, Jesus just keeps trying to reintroduce you to a better reality, to true reality. And that true reality is the goodness that is already in you and the best life that God has for you. Again, the words of what Jesus says, I have come that you may have life to the fullest. Maybe translated in 2024, I want you to have the best life possible because this is your life and I'm a good God and there's so much goodness in you. I know that you've got all these dreams to be here in Hollywood, to be in La La Land, to be a creative, to create and to produce and to change the world, to build your empires, to be in that relationship. And by the way, that doesn't make you bad or selfish. That's just normal humanity stuff. We talked about this in here a few weeks ago, Richard Rohr's Falling Upward book, the first half of life and the second half of life. The first half of life, you're trying to prove yourself. That's normal. You're making your path in the world. You're making your mark on things. And hopefully if you do that well, and more importantly, you do that through calling, you do that through integration and health and wholeness, then you'll get through the first half of life, and then you'll get to the second half of life, where you don't have to prove yourself anymore. And there's way bigger things than all of that. But that's okay, because you did it. Or you found a way, or you found out the real truth. It's not everything it's caught up to be. The good stuff is Trader Joe's on a Tuesday with your wife, or husband, depends. It's that conversation with your child. It's having a picnic in a park with some friends. That's the good stuff that we all dream of and long for. And Jesus invites us into that. Some of the interesting things that are going on in this story is that we see who Jesus is, and we see that Jesus is about to be challenged. But again, Jesus shows us the best of who God is and the best of what it means to be human. When I look at Jesus, I was reading Psalm 23 a bunch this week. By the way, I love reading the Bible. I know that we're in a liberal church. The Bible is actually really cool. It works for me. I'm not trying to convince you of it. I just think that we haven't given it a good rap and we haven't seen it from healthy perspectives. But when I see that, I'm like, oh, Jesus, God's always been trying to show up in this healthier way. Psalm 23, right? The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. And then this verse got me this week. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He makes me. This good God makes me find rest, makes me lay down in goodness, makes me lay down in God's wholeness. What a good God. It's not a story of this God is tormenting me, wanting to see if I can live out all the laws and not smoke cigarettes or whatever the thing is. That's not what this God is doing. And it's that good God who calls Levi in this story. Why that's so important is back in the ancient world, Levi's a tax collector. Some truths have always been real. No one likes IRS agents. That's just the way that it is, I guess. God is love. We are good. And Dasani water tastes like hose water. Those are the truths of the universe that I think that we all know. Are we shaking? It's true, right? Why is that? I don't know. It's just I don't know. Yeah, it's just a thing. I completely lost track with the Dasani thing. I don't know why my brain went there. What was I talking about? Somebody? Truths. God's truths. Where was I at before that? God, I really derailed myself there. Huh? Levi, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, thanks for your help, guys. It's hard having ADHD up here. Levi was not liked. Tax collectors weren't liked in that world because they often took advantage of people. You've probably been in church before. You've heard these different stories, but it's such a unique part of the calling that's going on here. It's a weird story because this guy just gets up, leaves the life that he has, and goes to follow Jesus, which starts me off with Jesus is trustworthy in these ways. And part of what I want to reintroduce us to, remind ourselves of, is I believe that Jesus is trustworthy. I believe that the best version of Jesus that we find is worth following. I think that it's interesting. I'm not even trying to convince you of that. And what I love about Jesus is I don't think he's trying to convince you of it either. I don't think Jesus is trying to guilt you into anything. I think all that Jesus is trying to do is model the best life for you possible. And then says, will you come and follow me? Because I think for Levi, like a lot of us, he was probably stuck. He's stuck in a job, in a place, in life for things that he doesn't want, and it's not working out for him. And maybe that's rooted in his insecurities or his ego or pain or culture or family. I don't know. We all get stuck for different reasons. And here's this moment of awakening where God comes in and calls him to something else. And Levi knows what Jesus is calling him to. Jesus isn't calling him to riches. Jesus isn't calling him to wealth. Jesus isn't calling him to something. Jesus is a rabbi who has been on the streets healing people. So clearly Levi is saying, that's what I want to respond to. I want to leave wherever I'm stuck because it's not working for me anymore. And I'm willing to take the risk to go follow you, Jesus, because this is the life that I want. Again, not vocation, not dream job, not relationship. I just want to be integrated. I just want to be whole. I just want to be healthy. I just want to be healed. That's the invitation of calling of Jesus. Do we want that? Do you want to practice that is all that Jesus invites us into. And then what I love in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to see it about 100 more times, is that there is this dichotomy that's created. And we talked about it in here, but I want to keep talking about it. That Jesus says, here's the crowd, and Jesus never condemns the crowd, never excludes the crowd. Jesus only heals the crowd. But then there's another set of people, that there's these followers of Jesus, and Jesus says, come and follow me, and this is the life that I want to show you. And then there's this third group that we're going to see in the Gospel of Mark a lot. You're going to see, especially in these next few chapters, they're the Pharisees, the religious leaders. I think today we would say more of just obstacles. They're obstacles that get in the way of our health and our healing. Those obstacles will always be there. This isn't one of those talks of like, all you got to do is just commit your life to Jesus and say this magical prayer, and then next year, everything's going to work out for you. That's not the invitation. The invitation is a journey to wholeness. Jeff, your journey to health, I'm not picking on you, but you said it was so beautiful, right? It took effort. And that's the journey that Jesus is inviting us into, is a different type of effort and practice. I think this is the phrase I've been using with myself lately, where my intention and my attention is drawn towards Jesus. And when that intention and attention is towards Jesus, I have found that my life, I'm not putting this on anyone else, has been healthier, has been more whole, has been more healed. I'm just saying that's been true for me. And when I've had my intention and attention towards Jesus in my life, it's been consistently true. For the people that I look to in my life who've got a ton of wisdom, who've made it, they got adult kids who love them now, they've built great things in the world, they're in the second half of life, the people that I look to be my mentors, their intention and their attention towards Jesus has shaped them in really beautiful ways. They have listened to this calling through different seasons of their life, and they have followed it and practiced it, and that's beautiful to me. But what you'll see here when we see the Pharisees in the stories is that they challenge what Jesus is offering in the world. They're not challenging Jesus because they're evil or malicious. And this is just a quick thing that I want to talk about. I think sometimes when we get to different seasons of life, we still want to have someone to blame, right? We want a bad guy in our story, and that's just a massive distraction, by the way. And in Jesus' time, the Pharisees are just these people. They're really passionate about religious laws. They're really passionate about following God in a very specific way, because a few hundred years before that, the temple, their entire religious structure, was destroyed. And for them, they said, if we can just follow these laws more, if we can just do this better, then maybe that won't happen to us again. In that day, they were conservatives. A conservative shadow side is simply fear. You don't want to experience change because you fear that it will disrupt the system that you're living in. That doesn't make you bad, evil, or malicious. That's just your perspective on the world. Many of us have left conservative churches and evangelicalism, and it's just a lot of people who fear that a broader interpretation of the Bible or opening up some views about Jesus is going to lose some magic or something, and they fear that God's going to be angry with them. And God's not going to be angry with them, but that's just their fear. And by the way, for us liberals out there, our shadow side is anger. There's just as many fundamentalist liberals as there are conservatives, doing the same tactics, by the way. Exclusion, right? And if you don't agree with everything that I'm saying with you, then you don't get to be a part of the group. Those are just obstacles. If you ever run into people who are offering you those types of obstacles, then you get to participate in what Jesus is doing. You don't have to let those voices control your life. You don't have to let those voices be the ones that shape you. And this is why Jesus keeps introducing you and keeps reminding you, come and follow me. Because there will always be other voices. And you should garner wisdom and gain wisdom and use that wisdom to filter the opinions and the voices that are coming into your life. But you don't have to listen to all of them. Jesus keeps inviting you to say, put your intention and attention towards me. And here I will give you rest. Here, I will make you lie down in green pastures. Here, I will bring rest for your soul. This is the life that I offer you. And that's, I think, freeing. I think sometimes as I moved into this year, it's been like one of the greatest years of peace in my life. But anyone just so scared of the election coming up sometimes thinking about it? It's just the anxiety that's in the air, our culture and what we've made of it. I'm just not interested in any way, shape, or form. I've just made a commitment to myself this year. I don't have to lose myself in all of those voices. I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to let that be a distraction from my life about where I'm going and what that means for me. And I don't need to listen to everyone's opinions. I'm just exhausted from everyone's opinions. I'm in a season of life where peace is limiting the opinions, putting boundaries around myself, putting my intention and attention towards the calling of Jesus to wake up, to move towards health, to move towards integration, to move towards healing, to surround myself with less people who are also interested in those things. And that's where I want my life to be. That's what's interesting to me at this place, and I think that's what Jesus is inviting us into. Jesus is inviting people to follow him and to do it together, because there's always in our world going to be millions of obstacles and voices that are getting in the way of that wholeness, and Jesus is inviting us as a group to go follow this way that will bring health and healing for us in a different way. When you look at integral psychology, there's a couple other steps, and we're going to get to them in the weeks to come, but the first one is wake up. Again, we wake up at different times in our life because we've experienced great suffering or great love. The next one is grow up. And then the one after that is clean up. You know that to be true. I'm not going to spend a ton of time there today. But to get to show up, you just got to grow up. Sometimes we didn't do that well in the church. I'm remiss to that fact. We just did a lot of say the prayer of Jesus, worship louder, pray more fervently, and it's going to be okay. And we didn't say practice emotional maturity. Go do mental health. Create actual spiritual practices that create space for God and that are changing your life. Not just ones that you're doing to please God because you think God's playing a game with you. Very different intention. That's what we're invited into, is that type of growing up. So that Levi will go from a tax collector who gets invited to a party with Jesus to following Jesus to, by the way, this Levi is the one who writes the Gospel of Matthew. To saying, I went from waking up because I had this moment where I was stuck in my life and I thought nothing was going to change, and I guess I'm just a tax collector and people don't like me, or my life's not working out for me, or whatever it may be. I was invited into a life of healing and integration and wholeness, and I went on this journey with Jesus, and he showed me how to grow up. He showed me what maturity looked like. He showed me what boundaries looked like. He showed me what dealing with disagreement looked like. He showed me what suffering looked like. Even when we all left him at the end, he showed us what grief and loss looked like. He showed us what transformation looked like. He showed us what life looked like. This is the way of Jesus that we're invited into. And then the next step is cleanup. By the way, I'm a good liberal. We don't always love cleanup as much. Because I think sometimes we got so much weird moralism over here in conservative world. We're adverse to some cleanup. Ethics are still good. They're still healthy. Boundaries are okay. Maybe it's good to ask some deeper questions, right? Growing up is the emotional, whatever maturity. The cleanup is saying, I got shadow sides. And those shadow sides tend to leak out. when I'm not in health. Again, this is a passage that says sinners 3 times. He hung out with tax collectors and sinners, tax collectors and sinners, tax collectors and sinners. We say this phrase in here a lot. If you grow up with the word sinner just being wildly triggering in the world that you came from, see it as a much more holistic word. There's a guy named Cornelius Plantinga. Of course, that guy became a theologian with a name like that, right? Who gives us this definition of the palpable disruption of shalom. That's what sin is. Shalom just being wholeness. All that it is, all that to be a sinner means is we have coping mechanisms. And we cope when we are in unhealth. We move to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn because we don't know how to care for ourselves. Something is bothering us in the world and we don't know how to care, so we cope. That doesn't make you evil or bad or depraved. That just makes you a human being who hasn't fully grown up yet. And that's okay. That's the journey of Jesus. So what Jesus is saying is, I want to bring these people along and show them a way of growing up and cleaning up that will work for their lives. What a freer invitation that is. It's not judgment. It's not guilt. It's one of maturity and health and transformation. And that this Levi and all of us are invited into this journey from waking up to growing up to cleaning up and to eventually showing up. And over here is the magic. And by the way, this is not linear all the time. It's not like you just do this once. For the people that I know in my life that I look to that are way older than me, that they got all this maturity and health and wisdom that I love, they've gone through this thing like 10 different times. And those are like the big journeys, right? And then there's the infinite small ones. And that's just part of it. That's the journey that Jesus invites us into. We're about to have Easter 2 weeks from now, right? That's just not a story of 2,000 years ago there was death and resurrection. That's the human, universal story that death and resurrection are a constant part of our lives. And how you participate with that death and resurrection is everything. Will you be transformed by the pain, or will you transmit it? That is your choice. But Jesus invites us in to a bigger, richer, deeper story. And so I just want to share one story to finish with you. I was thinking about this sermon of calling, and you know, you like search your brain, and like as a pastor, you have like all these notes classically of your stories, things like that. And you want like this big one, when I was called and there was this moment, and that was the awakening and the epiphany, and I have those. But then I realized, but that's not the most interesting part of my life. The most interesting part of my life is that recently I went through great suffering. And great suffering allowed me to wake up again. And it allowed me to wake up to the small details that are in my life. What I didn't wake up to is, well, I'm going to be more grand, I'm going to make more money, I'm going to go do this thing. No, what I woke up to in the last year, those are my kids. And I get to be with them. They show me health and healing and integration and wholeness. This is where the magic is that no Emmy or Oscar or 10-figure check could ever give me. My wholeness, my healing, my integration is Friday night when I'm exhausted from being gone for 15 hours and all I want to do is lay in bed and finish the last frickin' episode of Loki. But my 8-year-old says, Dad, would you come in my room? I just want to lay next to you and tell you dinosaur facts. That's the wholeness. And I went and laid in his room and looked on his freckly little nose with his big smile as he told me dinosaur fact after dinosaur fact after dinosaur fact. And that's what we all want. Whatever that version of is it for you that you want to lay in bed at night and know that you love yourself and that you love your body for the first time. That's showing up and then getting to share it with other people. You want to be there with the people that you love. I heard it the other day. We have our work resumes, and then we have our funeral resumes, and they're very different things. Our work resumes is we all, in some part of life, want to tell everybody and be like, yeah, I made this much money, and I built this thing, and I got this Oscar, and then this is when these things happened to me, and this is, yeah, I look good, and you do. But that's what no one talks about at a funeral. At a funeral, they say, he was a great dad. He was at all my baseball games. He went through things. He worked through things, but he always showed up in my life. And that's what I want for you, New Abbey. I want us all to wake up. And I believe that wherever you're at and whoever you are, that Jesus is calling you to wholeness and to integration and to healing. But man, what I long for all of us is that we'll be people who will show up one day. will taste of the magic of life, will have rich relationships with one another, and that will allow our light and our wholeness to shine into each other so that we can change the world. That's the gift. We're going to get back into our groups. I'm pretty sure my question has nothing to do with what I talked about. It doesn't. I forgot about that. So talk about whatever you want that you heard in the sermon, and we'll come back together in 5 minutes.